Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Samich Tes Amud Aleph, starting with Daf Samich Ches Amud Beis, 3 lines from the bottom. The Mishnah says that there are 3 different things that there's a machlekes whether you can doiches HaShabbos for. The first one is carrying the animal into the Beis HaMikdash on Shabbos. The second one, bringing the animal outside from the Techum into the Beis HaMikdash. And 3, removing the Yabelis if there's a wart on the animal. All these 3 things is a machlekes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua, whether indeed you can go ahead and doiches HaShabbos. Rabbi Eliezer says you can doiches HaShabbos, for after all, he says, a kal v'chomer. If you can go ahead and sheichet the Korban Pesach on Shabbos, which is a malacha d'oraisa, then certainly you can do a shavus d'Rabbanan, and therefore, since these 3 things are shvusin, they're going to be mutter. On that, Rabbi Yoshua said that we find a pircha on this kal v'chomer. For after all, on Yom Tif, the Torah enables us, permits us to go ahead and cook for oichel nefesh. And that's a malacha d'oraisa. Nonetheless, one cannot carry food from outside the Techum, which is only a shvus. And therefore, we see that indeed a shvus is chamor. If you could have done it before Yom Tif, then it's not permissible to be done on Yom Tif. Says the Gemara, Omer Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi says, now what Rabbi Yoshua says back to Rabbi Eliezer after he made that kal v'chomer. Rabbi Eliezer says back to Rabbi Yoshua on that pircha of his kal v'chomer is that when it comes to oichel nefesh, that's a reshus, and therefore you cannot bring me a pircha on my kal v'chomer because the Korban Pesach is a mitzvah. On that, the Gemara says, Omer of Ashi, ulamai de ka'omer Rabbi Eliezer nami yontif reshus islay pircha. The Gemara says, even according to Rabbi Eliezer, says Rav Ashi, though he holds that oichel nefesh is merely a reshus, but it would be an equal pircha to him, that which Rabbi Yoshua pointed out, as follows. Uma yomtiv shehitir bo melacha, shel reshus lo hitir shvus she'ima. When it comes to oichel nefesh on yomtiv, even if you're going to magdir it to be a reshus, Rabbi Eliezer, so the Torah permitted one to cook on yomtiv for oichel nefesh, for that reshus. But it did not permit the bringing of that oichel from outside the Techum, which is merely a shavus. Then Shabbos, which is more chamor than Yom Tif. Shelo hitir boy ela malacha shel mitzvah, that were only matir the shchita of the Korban Pesach. Eino din shelo hitir shavus she'ima. Is it not then a kal v'chomer that then it would not be permitted on Shabbos to go ahead and do a shavus together with that? We're on top of Samech Tes Amud Aleph. The Gemara answers on behalf of Rabbi Eliezer, shvus the mitzvah adiflei. Rabbi Eliezer holds that the shvus of a mitzvah is preferred, is stronger. In other words, although there's a shvus of the reshus, namely on Yontif, that they did not allow one to perform. However, when it comes to the mitzvah of Korban Pesach, there they would allow you, says Rabbi Eliezer, to perform the shvus of a mitzvah. The Gemara now brings Tanya. This is a brisa that expounds the shakal v'tarya, the give and take between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua that we have in our Mishnah. Says the brisa, Omar Rabbi Eliezer said the following, Umali, what is it that I have to then explain why these 3 things that are listed in the Mishnah, namely carrying the behema into the Beis HaMikdash, or bringing the behema from outside the Techum, or removing the Yabelis, what is it that I have to explain to say why these things are indeed not osir? He says as follows. Im dachu machshirei mitzvah shela'acher shchita es haShabbos dis avilei mitzvah. Rabbi Eliezer argues and says, when it comes to michui, which the Mishnah lists and says this everybody agrees is permissible to be done on Shabbos, when it's on Yudalid Nisan on Shabbos, Michui Krovov, everybody agrees that you can go ahead and pierce the innards to then remove the liquid from the waste of the animal, so that does not putrefy the intestines of the animal, and it shouldn't be a bizoin of the korban which is going to be eaten ultimately at night by the bailim. So the Gemara says, according to Rabbi Eliezer, if that's so, that one permits the michui of the intestines, which is on Shabbos, and that's performed after the shchita of the animal, which means that this is merely a hechsher of a mitzvah, so that it shouldn't then become disgusting, but the performance of the mitzvah was already done, i.e. the shchita and the zrikas hadam, then lo yitchu machshirei mitzvah shedifnei shchita es haShabbos, would you then not permit machshirei mitzvah before the shchita is done, namely carrying the animal to the Beis HaMikdash, or bringing the animal from outside the tchum, or removing the yabelis? All of these things are performed before the shchita to enable the shchita to be performed. So certainly that should be permissible, says Rabbi Eliezer. Omar la Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says back in response, the mali. Why do I have to then explain otherwise? Im dachu machshirei mitzvah shala'achar shchita es haShabbos. If the chacham were pushed away the machshirei mitzvah that was performed for a shchita that was done already on Shabbos, because it was already a mitzvah that was performed, therefore they allowed you to go ahead and do michui, which is then going to be permissible after the actual mitzvah of the shchita. Sharei dachsa shchita es haShabbos. Since the Torah already was doichet the mitzvah of shchita, which is the malacha of shchita, which is daraisa, so then the chachamim enabled you to go ahead and do michui krovov afterwards. But Toimer Yidchu Machshirei Mitzvah Shedifnei Shchita Es HaShabbos Shelo Notchosa Shchita Es HaShabbos. But would you say that they would allow you to do Machshirei Mitzvah before the actual mitzvah was nitcha? In other words, if there's no mitzvah yet, that in other words that the Torah will not allow you to perform because you don't have the animal, or you have an animal with a yabelis, who says they're going to allow you then, the Chacham would allow you to then remove it before the mitzvah? And therefore, it's not permissible to do. Dover Acher, the Gemara brings another response that Rabbi Akiva gave to Rabbi Eliezer. Shema yimotze zevach per psul v'nimtza mechalas haShabbos l'mafreya. If they allow you perform such shvusin by carrying in the behema or bringing it again from outside the tchum or removing the abeles, then all of these things may lead to a shchita, whereby they'll realize that indeed it's pasul. If indeed such a psul exists, when they find a psul, it'll come out they were machal Shabbos l'mafreya by bringing in this animal or removing the abelis. Ask the Gemara, if that's the argument Rabbi Akiva is making, then ihochi, if so, mishchat nami lo nishchat. You should never allow the shechita to be performed on Yudalid when it comes out to be on Shabbos, because maybe when they shech the animal, then you'll find that the animal was pasul. The mafreya, you did a shechita shalol tzorich, and therefore it was a malacha. You're machal Shabbos. Yet we know that can't be true, because the Torah does say that when Yudalid comes out to be on Shabbos, you do shech the korban Pesach. Bismano lemoy adoy. Ella, says the Gemara, ha'amar lebereishu parche. Really, Rabbi Akiva said the latter argument first, the davar acher that we brought first. He first made that argument. Maybe if you'll go ahead and bring an animal from the outside or remove the abelis and shech it, you'll determine that it was a psul, which case you were mechal Shabbos. On that, Rabbi Eliezer argued back on Rabbi Akiva. If that's so, then you can never shech the korban Pesach on Yudalid when it comes out to be in Shabbos, because maybe you'll find the psul mechal Shabbos the mafreya. To which Rabbi Akiva accepted that pircha, and then he said the hodar amalei hach. Then he said what he said before the kal v'chomer, the mali im dachu, which he basically argued on Rabbi Eliezer's kal v'chomer, and he says, how can you tell me the only reason why the chachamim were permitting the michui of the kravov is because the shechita was already done. Since the shechita was already doiches haShabbos, the chachamim were mermekel and allowed the michui kravav to be performed. But to say that they'll allow you then to mimach shirei things before the actual mitzvah, when indeed it wasn't never nidche, the Shabbos was in nidcha because you didn't have an animal yet? Certainly not. The Gemara now quotes the Mishnah, Heshiv Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva retorted back to Rabbi Eliezer, V'omar Hazah toichiach. Rabbi Eliezer comes in and says that Hazah, which is merely a shavus, which is to be performed on the seventh day, somebody who's tamei meis, he has to be sprinkled by the mei para, the ephah para, on the third and on the seventh day to become purified. So Rabbi Akiva says if the seventh day comes out to be on Shabbos, although it's a shavus, he will not go ahead and receive the hazah, even though that now will not enable him to perform the mitzvah of Korban Pesach, which is a mitzvah. So he's not going to be able to do the mitzvah of Korban Pesach because of the hazah, which is merely a shvus that they did not permit. Tanya, the Gemara brings a brisa expanding, again, the shakla v'atarya, the explanations that Rabbi Eliezer, the give and take between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. Omar Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer sends back to Rabbi Akiva. Akiva, b'shchita heshvantani. You have answered me mockingly about the shchita. Because Rabbi Akiva then said, maybe it's hafuch, after Rabbi Eliezer goes and says, if the Torah permits one to sheichet the animal, the Korban Pesach, on Shabbos, which is a malacha d'oraisa, then kol shekain, kal v'chaimer, they allow you, the Rabbanan, the shvus that we're making before. They allow you to do a shvus. On that, Rabbi Akiva says, maybe hafuch. You're telling me, a kal v'chaimer, if they allow you to sheichet, then certainly they'll allow you to do the shvus of hazah. Says Rabbi Akiva, hafuch, maybe since hazah is prohibited, which is merely a shvus, then kal v'chaimer, the shechita, which is d'oraisa, is prohibited. To which that can't be. Even Rabbi Akiva understands that cannot be, because the Torah does permit shechita on Yudala when it comes out to be in Shabbos. It's doiches HaShabbos. So on that, Rabbi Eliezer says to Rabbi Akiva, Akiva, you mocked me when you answered me. B'shechita tehei misosoi. And then he gives a curse that the shechita will be his death. Now it comes out, and the Psachim point out, that Rabbi Akiva indeed received such a curse. Because Rabbi Akiva, when he was teaching Torah b'Rabbim, the Romans brought him, and they took him, and they put him to death, which is recorded in the Gemara and Brachos. So there we see that this klala that Rabbi Eliezer indeed gave him came to fruition. That indeed, this is what had happened. That he was killed by human hands, by human beings, the Romans. Omar la Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva then said back to Rabbi Eliezer, his Rebbe, Rebbe, atach bireni b'shas hadin. Do not deny during the time that I'm giving you this argument that you did not agree before and teach before that hazah, shvus, is prohibited on Shabbos. Because I received this teaching from you. Hazah shvus hi ve'ena doiches haShabbos. Hazah is a shvus and is prohibited. One cannot then do that on Shabbos. The Chi asked the Gemara, if Rabbi Akiva then received this from his Rebbe, Rabbi Eliezer, then me'ached dehu agmarei, my time kahadarbei. If indeed Rabbi Eliezer taught this to Rabbi Akiva, then why did Rabbi Eliezer respond back to Rabbi Akiva and deny it? Omar Ula said, Rabbi Eliezer ki agmarei hazah the truma agmarei. When Rabbi Eliezer was talking about saying the hazah is also not doiches haShabbos, he's talking about when the hazah is for the eating of truma. The seventh day comes out to be on Shabbos, and Rabbi Eliezer says you cannot go ahead and give him hazah on Shabbos to permit him to eat truma. The truma gufa loidach yeshabbos. Since truma itself is something that one cannot go ahead and it's not doiches haShabbos, you cannot take out truma from your produce, from your tevil, because it's mesakein the produce, and midrabanan that's aser. So therefore, they didn't allow you, Rabbi Eliezer didn't allow you, they said, the Chachamim, to go ahead and do hazah, to permit, to be machshir you to eat truma either. Rabbi Akiva, nami ki oisvei hazah. But Rabbi Akiva also asked, he also challenged from hazah. the truma oisvei. He was also challenging from truma. So how come Rabbi Eliezer did not accept it and Rabbi Akiva did? Shehi mitzvah v'hi mishum shavus. The answer is because Rabbi Akiva, he held that indeed this is a mitzvah and it's a shvus. So although it's a mitzvah, but because it's a shvus, in other words, the Korban Pesach is a mitzvah. And therefore, although there's a mitzvah to eat the Korban Pesach, to be kind the Korban Pesach on Yud Daled ben Nisan, but Rabbi Akiva says, if indeed he himself was tamei and he had to get sprinkled on the seventh day, we'll say hazah is osir. And therefore, although Rabbi Akiva challenged Rabbi Eliezer from hazah, Rabbi Akiva was talking about when there's the need to hazah for the mitzvah of Korban Pesach. V'hu sovar, but Rabbi Eliezer thought hazah the Pesach kamoisivlei. Rabbi Eliezer thought that he's coming to challenge him from Korban Pesach. To which Rabbi Eliezer said, you're challenging from Korban Pesach, hare, I only taught Truma, that Truma is something that's prohibited to be done. But Hazah for Korban Pesach, that you can do. So on that, Rabbi Akiva thought that is Osir. He said Hazah is Osir even for Korban Pesach, for the mitzvah. On that, Rabbi Eliezer says no. For the mitzvah of Korban Pesach, certainly it's mutter to do Hazah. Mosiv Rabba asked on this Perush that we just brought, that explains why Rabbi Eliezer did not accept Rabbi Akiva's argument if Rabbi Eliezer himself taught this to Rabbi Akiva. Heishiv Rabbi Eliezer v'Omar. He brings a brisa Rabbah to disprove that which we just said, name of Ula. Hazos tamei meis tochiach shechal shvi shelo liyos b'Shabbos. Ube'erev ha'Pesach she mitzvah v'hi mishum shvus ve'ena doiches ha'Shabbos. In other words, this brisa records that which Rabbi Akiva responded to Rabbi Eliezer was talking about, where the seventh day came out to be on Shabbos, and the seventh day came out to be a Shabbos, we're talking about somebody who was tamei meis, not talking about somebody who wanted to then eat truma. And therefore, if tamei meis, which comes out to be the seventh day on Shabbos, is the hazah is not doiches haShabbos, and that's a mitzvah, then on Erev Pesach, when you need hazah for the seventh day to then perform Korban Pesach, certainly will also not doiches haShabbos. Elavadai hazah the Pesach agmarei. So therefore, can't be what Ula is talking about, that the argument between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva was an argument about truma, because here the Brisa states clearly that we're talking about the hazah of Korban Pesach. So since we're talking about the hazah of Korban Pesach, that's not the reason why Rabbi Eliezer did not accept Rabbi Akiva. So why did he not accept it? Explains the Gemara. Elavadei hazah the Pesach agmarei. Rather, the hazah of Pesach, they were indeed Rabbi Akiva was taught by Rabbi Eliezer previously. And that's why Rabbi Akiva then said with the argument that you, Rabbi Eliezer, taught me that one cannot do hazah in order to perform the Korban Pesach, which is a mitzvah. If indeed that Rabbi Eliezer taught this to Rabbi Akiva, so then when Rabbi Akiva says this to Rabbi Eliezer, then why did Rabbi Eliezer contradict his words? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Eliezer Gemare is akerle v'oser Rabbi Akiva la'ad kure Gemare. That Rabbi Eliezer, indeed, he had the teaching, but even though he taught it to him, he forgot it. On that, Rabbi Akiva comes to remind him of his teaching. Ask the Gemara, v'neimo lebehedya, then why didn't he then say straightforward? Why did he have to then say the roundabout way in order to then have Rabbi Eliezer come to the conclusion that indeed hazah is what he had taught once before and is not doiches haShabbos? And the Gemara, kasavar lav orach ara. The Gemara says that Rabbi Akiva felt that it wasn't derech eretz to then tell his Rebbe what he taught before directly. He forgot, and therefore he wanted to merames to him so that he'll come to remember it. Ask the Gemara, now that we have then come to this conclusion that both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva would say that hazah for the Korban Pesach is osir to be done on Shabbos, then ask the Gemara, what's wrong with hazah? What is the prohibition over here? V'hazah, my time alodachya Shabbos. Why is it not doiches haShabbos? Michti, let us see now. Mitiltil ba'almehu, it's going to be mitaltil, the water. Didchi Shabbos mishum Pesach, just because of its problem of mitaltilin. That should be allow you then to allow us to be doiches to Shabbos for, in order then to perform the Korban Pesach. Why is that a reason enough not to then do hazah on Shabbos? It's something that should be permissible, should be pushed off. Omar Rabbi says no, because there's more of a reason. Here we're talking about a gezeira. Here a person might come to then do a malacha de'araisa of hoitzah, or as the Gemara says, be mavir dalad amos b'shus harabim, and therefore such a gezeira they weren't nidcha the gezeira on Shabbos to perform hazah. Now ask the Gemara, but we know Shitas Rabbi Eliezer rather, who taught us in the Gemara in Shabbos that machshir mitzvah does doiche Shabbos. For example, if a person does not have a knife to perform the bris milah, then he can go ahead and bring the knife even from the Rishus HaRabim to the Rishus HaYachid, because his machshir mitzvah is doiches HaShabbos. So ask the Gemara, Rabbi Eliezer ni'avrei, why don't we say this doiches Shabbos here too? Certainly then, if it's only a chashash, maybe he'll carry Dal Rishus HaRabim, the water, in order to then do hazah. Certainly Rabbi Eliezer would matir that. Answers Gemara, Doha Amar Rabbi Eliezer, machshirei mitzvah doichin. Gemara asks the question still. Doha Rabbi Eliezer, machshir mitzvah doichin HaShabbos. Answers the Gemara, Amrei, Hani mili heche de gavre gufei chazi v'dami chiyuva alei. Aval hacha de gavre gufei lechazi l'rami chiyuva alei. When does Rabbi Eliezer matir permit machshir mitzvah and says it's doiche Shabbos even malachos de'araisa? That's when the person is roy. In the case of Mila, you have a child who's ready and able to then have a bris mitzvah to be performed on him. So then, machshir mitzvah is doicha. You can take the izmel, you can take the knife, the mila knife, and carry it from the Rishus HaRabim to Rishus HaYachid. It's doiches HaShabbos. But over here, when the person is not roy, because he himself is tamei, so then to then do a machshir mitzvah when he's in such a state, that is not doiches HaShabbos, and that's the chiluk that Rabbi Eliezer makes. The Gemara now explains, based on what we just said, then we can deduce the following. Omar Rabbi, Ledivrei Rabbi Eliezer, according to Rabbi Eliezer's chiluk, that machshir mitzvah is only performed for somebody who is roy, but somebody who's not roy, then we will not go ahead and doiche Shabbos. According to Rabbi Eliezer, asked the Gemara, then katan bori mechamin lechamin lehavroisu lamula b'Shabbos. A child who is healthy, we will heat up water on Shabbos to give him a warm bath, to strengthen himself, to strengthen the child, so we can go ahead and give him bris milah on Shabbos. Doha chazi lekotin, because it's fitting for the kotin to get the bris milah. He's bori, he's healthy, and therefore the doiches HaShabbos with the machshir mitzvah. But choyle ein mechamin lo yichamin lahavrois lamula doha chazi le. Then it would come out that a child who is sick, in order to then give him a bath, a hot bath, we will not heat up water, so that we can strengthen him, so that we can give him a bris milah. Omar Rava said, V'i borihu lama lechamin lahavroisai. If he's indeed healthy, why would we need to then heat up water to strengthen him? Elo Omar Rava. Therefore, Rava comes and says, Hakol choylin hein eitzel milah. All children are considered to be sick in regards to giving a bris milah, and therefore, echad kotin bori ve'echad kotin choyla, ei mechamin lechamin lahavroisu lamula b'Shabbos dehol lechazi. Therefore, Rava concludes, when it comes to then heating up water to give a hot bath to a child to perform his bris milah, whether the child is bori or is choyla, it is prohibited. And therefore, hot water has to be heated up before Shabbos in order to then give him a hot bath on Shabbos to perform bris milah.